Have you ever heard the song, You're Amazing? Today, I'm going to interview Martin Ross Kerr, who is a local Edmonton musician and also a member of the Edmonton Baha'i community, on our Edmonton Baha'i YouTube channel to talk about what's your Baha'i story. And Martin will tell us a little bit about his life, how he grew up, his spiritual and religious connections, and more about himself and his music as we go through the interview. My name is Marie Gervais, and I'm happy to welcome you to our YouTube channel today. Martin, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, and thanks for introducing me with my middle name. I feel like I might be in trouble with the headmaster or something.
Yeah, you probably are. So that actually brings me to my first question. And the question is, when you were growing up in England, correct?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about you growing up and you know, where you're from and how you ended up in Canada. Can you fill us in some of those details?
Oh, it's a long and winding story, but I'll try and give you the good bits. I was raised in a small, sleepy little market town called Oakham, right in the middle of England. And, you know, looking back, it was a lovely place to grow up. We spent a lot of time outdoors, and I kind of knew the same group of kids all through my childhood. And we didn't have family around because my parents had just moved there from Scotland. My whole family is Scottish, but they moved to England right before I was born. And that's kind of a big deal for Scottish people to go and live in England.
No kidding.
Known as the old enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents had their thick Scottish accents and always felt a little bit out of place in England. But we would drive up the 7 or 8 hours up to Scotland to see the grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles every Christmas and every summer holidays. So it was an interesting place to grow up because in some ways it was very parochial and inward looking. It's kind of town where everyone knows each other and some people never leave. But at the same time, I grew up with this world embracing vision, being raised as a Baha'i and knowing that I had friends not only all over the country, but all over the world. And my parents really imbued that consciousness in me from a very, very young age that the world is one country and mankind its citizens. And they made me feel like the whole earth was really my home. And any chance they got, they would take me traveling. We weren't a wealthy family by any stretch. My mum was a teacher once she got working, once we were in school. And my dad worked actually for the Bahai Publishing Trust, which is a charitable body that's responsible for translating and distributing Baha'i literature throughout the world. And so working for a charity, he wasn't rolling in it, but he did get a lot of opportunities to travel with his work. And I remember a wonderful trip that we took together when I was 5 years old, that summer that I turned 6, I think. We drove around Europe and we went to 12 different countries in 2 weeks, sleeping in the back of the car and occasionally putting up a tent if we could find a campsite, and eating muesli and sausages nonstop for 2 weeks. It was an incredible adventure just to see so much of the world in so little time with my family at such a young age. And so those kind of adventures really gave me a taste for travel and for meeting new people and for being open to new possibilities.
And for not worrying if you had enough money to travel or, you know, just sleeping in the back of the car, you can go anywhere, really.
That's right. And I think my dad had done the same thing when he was, when he had left home at 16, he traveled a lot around Europe in the back of a van putting on theatre shows. When he first became a Baha'i, he formed a street theatre group, and they traveled around Europe putting on shows in market squares all around Europe to share the Baha'i teachings through the arts.
Wow.
So he was well versed in getting by on not very much.
And I have a burning question, like, why did your parents move from Scotland to England, and why did they choose this sleepy little market town that they moved to?
Well, specifically because the job that my father was invited to take up as manager of the Bahai Publishing Trust, that company, a charity, was based in Oakham. I guess they found a cheap warehouse and office space there. So it had been based there for a while, and they moved down there. I guess it was after my parents had graduated from university in Stirling, which was where they met in Scotland. My sister had been born up there, and they moved down to Oakham just before I was born. And so we stayed there for the next 18, 19 years. I was born and raised there and did all my schooling there until the day after high school. My parents sold the house from under me. I just graduated the day before, and the next day they sold up and left for China for their next adventure. And
You have a family that was not afraid of risk, but also they had the advantages of being rooted in a place for a while to feel like you belong to that place too.
Yeah, it was a wonderful balance looking back, actually, because I really did have solid friends that I had known my whole life, but also had all these doors open to me in terms of possibilities for the future. And the fact that not only do we have family across the border in Scotland, but we also had friends that we'd visited around Europe. And every time we got a chance to go to a Baha'i conference or summer school or winter school, I would make new friends from not only all over the UK, but from beyond as well. And so I never, even when times were hard, because every kid goes through hard times at school where they fall out with their friends or they're getting bullied or whatever. And growing up as a young ginger kid in England, there's always opportunity for getting bullied, especially if you belong to a weird religion. I never felt alone because I always had friends that I had made at summer schools and winter schools and Baha'i conferences that were very deep friendships, even though they were formed over the space of just a few days, because it was in the context of these wonderful, enlightening ideas about creating a future of a peaceful, just world. We would really talk about important things together, and I felt like I knew those people on a different level.
Yeah, you just started right away with stuff that matters instead of worrying about having a mask and needing to get through it and finding the other person's mask. And you just went straight to the heart of the issues. And,
exactly.
And that's a great experience. And in Europe, you can do that sort of thing where you can go from one country to the next quite easily in a short period of time. And it's so different. And and the encouragement to learn different languages and join in and work across countries it's quite different from North America, where it's such a big deal just to go from one province to the next or one state to the next.
It certainly is easier to get around, although your mind can kind of contract with the size of the place that you're in. And to me and my friends growing up, going to London was a big deal. Mm-hmm. I lived 2 hours from London, and I probably went there less than a dozen times in my entire 18-year childhood. So, yeah, those small distances didn't always seem small. But I think, and also Britain is quite different from the rest of Europe, being off the continent, as we've seen. Yes. The attitudes can be a little bit different. And so the Dutch or the Belgians and the Swedes may speak 3 or 4 languages fluently, but that's certainly not usually the case in Britain. But my dad spoke French pretty well because he had gone to teach the Baha'i faith as a young man in Belgium and learned French on the go. And so he would teach us French prayers and songs growing up. I've forgotten most of it, but there was always an attitude that was a good thing to speak different languages. And my parents really gave me a sense of fascination and joy of discovery in meeting people from other places and trying new foods and trying new languages and really embracing all the culture that the world has to offer.
So then after high school, did you go to China with your parents, or did they go by themselves and you went later? What happened with that?
It was interesting because this was very much their adventure, and they told me of it almost a year before they had made the decision to go there. So that I had some time to get used to the idea. And I was really not very happy about it to start with, because it didn't leave me with much of a choice about what to do, or so I thought. But in reality, it just took away one choice, which was to stay where I was. And that was probably the last thing I wanted to do anyway. So I did come around, and my parents bribed me to study for my final exams. I'd always kind of done well at school, but was easily distracted because I had many, many interests and didn't always feel that school was the most important thing in my life. So my parents bought me a round the world ticket with some of their savings. And they told me that if I got straight A's in my final exams, that they would pay for that ticket and send me off traveling around the world. And if I got anything less than that, then I'd have to stay behind, get a job, and pay it off before I was allowed to go. So that was my motivation for working hard that final year. with all the distractions of being a young budding songwriter and falling hopelessly in love with unattainable girls at school. Well, one particular one. And so I got my A's and I went traveling around the world. And in that year off backpacking around the world, I did spend a couple of months. The first couple of months I spent with them in South China, working at the school that my dad had started, which is called Gateway Language Village. It's still operational. And I made some good friends there and got a bit of work experience, and then went off on my own travels.
That's great. And then you ended up in Canada because you met a lovely young woman that you eventually married and came to Canada with, or
yes. And it was actually that first year traveling around China that I happened to meet this young lady from Canada, and it was kind of an inauspicious first meeting. It was there was a little gathering, for an informal gathering for Bahai Youth at a friend's house in a neighboring city. I was living in Beijing at the time, and this was happening just down the road in Tianjin. It's one of those small cities of only 15 million people that you've never heard of. So there would have been about 20 young people there, and most of them were kind of 12, 13, 14. I was 18. There was like only two other older youth there, one of whom was this young lady from Canada called Tara. And we kind of hit it off as friends, chatting, and we seemed to have lots in common. And she was very clever. And I've always been attracted to really intelligent people that have a big vocabulary and aren't afraid to ask difficult questions and tell you exactly what they think about things. Mm-hmm. So that was the thing that first struck me about Tara, was that she was very direct and would say exactly what she thought about something, and always had interesting questions for people. So I liked her.
Which makes her a good lawyer.
Yes, it does. She ended up being a lawyer. But at the time we met, I was still hopelessly in love with a girl from high school that I had left behind.
Not so hopelessly. The unattainable one?
That's right. Right. I wrote many songs about her. So I wasn't really open to the possibility of somebody else being right for me at that point. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, after we had both moved on from China, she was then living in Newfoundland, and I was going to university in Virginia. And she sent me an email saying, "Hey, Martin, remember me? It's Tara. We met at that thing in Tianjin." I was just thinking about the kind of person I might like to spend the rest of my life with. And I made this chart, and you got the most points.
That's such a girl thing to do.
Well, it's a very Tara thing to do. And
it's also a very girl thing to do, you know?
Making lists of the guys you know and the qualities you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And so I was very flattered, obviously, to have come top of her list, but a little surprised as well, because we really hardly knew each other. We'd hung out 2 times in China and had very sporadic email contact after that. So we hardly knew each other, and I suggested that perhaps we should get to know each other a bit first before jumping into anything. But that directness of approach and that really emotional courage to open yourself up to a question like that really attracted me. And so I wanted to write back to her, and I wanted to get to know her better after that. And so we started writing back and forth, much longer and more personal emails. And she started sending me mixtapes, which is a wonderful way to woo somebody. And I used to make many mixtapes when I was at school.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if people still do that. I mean,
they just make Spotify playlists now. It doesn't have the same charm.
Just doesn't have the same ring to it.
No.
So I wanted to interrupt you a little bit on this, just because I have this other question. As you're talking, I'm thinking about something else. So you grew up as a Baha'i, and your parents were the ones that decided to become Baha'is, and you grew up in the Baha'i family. And a lot of people who grew up in a religion, especially the generation that you're in, don't necessarily continue. Mm-hmm. They don't continue in that religion. They're often distracted by the things that happen around them, or they feel that whatever they learned isn't applicable to the practicalities of what they're experiencing. Lots of things can happen where they become either indifferent or even antagonistic to the religion that they were born into. But did that happen to you? Did you have any period of time when you felt you were not close to the Baha'i faith, or where you doubted it, or where you thought you would move into some sphere where you actually didn't have a religion at all?
I think there were certainly moments of questioning, and that's important and healthy for every person to question, especially things that they've been born into. And that's one of the great things about the Baha'i faith, I think, is that you can't really be born into it, in the sense that you can be raised as a Baha'i child, but you're not automatically a Baha'i at the age of maturity unless you decide to be. So you can't default into the Baha'i faith. And there is kind of the age of maturity in the Baha'i faith is 15 years old, and many parents might expect their children to declare formally as Baha'is at the age of 15, but I didn't do that. And I'm grateful that my parents never put any kind of pressure on me to do so. I think because they really realize that the important thing is how the human heart feels towards its creator, and that journey is a very personal one. And if you're kind of compelled into it, then it's not real.
No.
So they gave me quite a lot of latitude and really tried more carrot than stick in terms of inspiring me to explore my own spirituality. And so I was certainly exposed to lots of inspiring experiences and inspiring people through the Baha'i community. And I always had this recognition in my heart that this was a good thing. And almost all my favorite people in the world happened to be Baha'is through the connections that I'd made through that community. And so I wanted to be like those people, especially some of the older youth that I'd looked up to growing up at those summer schools around the campfire, singing songs and prayers. And those were some of the most special moments in my life, real moments of spiritual communion, where you feel the tingle down your spine and you breathe deeper and appreciate the beauty around you and feel connected to those around you. And I think most people lack that in most of their life.
And having that opportunity to be inspired by older youth, there lots of children look up to youth, but they aren't always good examples to follow. Right. And I remember going to a summer school in another province with our children, and our younger son following the youth around, imitating their walk, imitating their swagger. If they would say prayers, he'd sit next to them and try and do exactly the same thing in the same way. He was just like so enamored of them. And I'm sure that those youth influenced him in ways he probably is not aware of now, but just because they were such good examples, they were good people, they were kind, they were caring, they were encouraging. And some of them would come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, your son is so wonderful." And I go, "Are you sure you got the right guy? This is my son we're talking about here. That the one you're referring to is wonderful. You're sure you got this right person?"
Yeah.
And it was because he really was very much influenced by them. And it wasn't that he was horrible. It was just that I wasn't used to people coming up to me complimenting me about him. And I think it was because of that example that he aspired to even at a young age.
Absolutely.
Probably that was an experience that you had too. I don't know if you've thought about it.
So yeah, absolutely. And it's not that any of these people were perfect.
No.
They're all going through their own struggles and experimentation as well. And I'm sure there's some negative things that I picked up in those environments too. But it was for sure a net positive. And to be around people who had a consciousness of a global community, who had a consciousness that and a vision that the world could be a place of justice and peace, and that we had a part to play in that, was so much bigger and more exciting than the kinds of dramas and struggles that I experienced with my peer group at home.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about your music. What you've been writing songs for a long time, since you were young, and then what's the influence of the Baha'i faith on your music? Would you just write from the heart, whatever comes out? I mean, because you write about a lot of different things. Some are experiences, some are family, some are love songs, some of them are angry songs, some of them are songs from the Baha'i writings. There's like a whole variety of stuff, and it's very authentic to listen to you sing and to hear your songs and the heart that you put into it. What's your inspiration process, and how do you write a song?
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very much what I'm trying to achieve as an artist, is a genuine personal connection. And I feel that if I have anything worth saying, it will come out. And so I'm not a terribly prolific songwriter. I'm more on the side of waiting for inspiration to strike, but I'm learning to kind of prime the pump and be more systematic about writing on a regular basis. And I kind of have to give myself deadlines and appointments with other songwriters to make that happen. But I still love the songs that come in the middle of the night. So I keep a journal by my bed just in case. Or often when I'm traveling, I'll get brilliant ideas on the plane or on the train or in the car, and I'll just record them on my voice memos on my phone so I don't forget them and then work on them later. But I very much try to write from the heart in my own voice. I have done some compositions of Baha'i writings to music, which is a really interesting process as well. But in terms of my original songs, I try to write about what I'm feeling and thinking, and that has always been informed by my perspective as a Baha'i, and that perspective grows the more I experience, the more I read and study and pray and serve. So I think you can't give people too much at once. And I'm not writing to try and promote the Baha'i teachings. I'm trying to write to share my experience with other people and hope that there's something of value in there. So that I'm always trying to strike a balance between what I need to say and what the audience needs to hear. And that is a very interesting balance and dynamic. So sometimes they're very emotional songs about love or about parenthood. And sometimes they're more universal things about the state of the world, or about growing older, or
stories about people you met.
That's right.
I think the song that you wrote, Mr. Lau, about that family in China that you had such a strong emotional connection to, and what they went through. I can't listen to that without weeping, and I've heard it over and over again. And I think, a lot of your stories that are like that too have that same characteristic of connecting hearts. I'm wondering, your experience right from the beginning was your parents were connecting your heart to other people around the world, and you can write really authentically about an experience that has your experience and their experience without it feeling like it's appropriation. And that's something that's come up a lot, I think. People say, don't steal a style, don't steal. You write from in your own style, in your own way, with your own musical influences, but you write about authentic experiences that you've had with other people. And I think that's why those songs are so effective and so meaningful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that is a song that told a story that was very much a part of my heart for many years before I wrote it. It was kind of a looking back to 10 years earlier when I'd had this experience meeting a very poor family in China that lived across the road from me. I was living and working in an expat school, teaching preschool to foreign kids from all around the world. And I felt a bit odd in that situation because I had gone to China to immerse myself in Chinese culture and try to get to know a quarter of the population of the world through their culture and experience. And here I was living apart from them in a literally gated and walled community. But over the wall, I could see this little farming community that it wasn't even supposed to be there. It was made up of migrant farmers who had come to Beijing illegally. You're only supposed to stay in the province or the town where your ID card says you belong. At least this was true when I lived there. And you need special permission to move to another part of the country. But these people had left their homes and moved to the big city to try and eke out a better living for themselves and their children. And this was a family of three, a wife and father and their teenage son, that were farming this tiny strip of land just across the wall from my gated community. And I managed to meet them in my time off and get to know them despite the language barrier. And they were some of the most generous-hearted and handed people that I'd ever met. And they always invited me in for dinner and wanted me to stay. And we would laugh and tell jokes and stories, mostly in sign language because we couldn't figure out what each other was saying half the time. But we became very good friends. And I wanted to tell from my perspective the experience of meeting those people and how I felt about them after the fact. The injustice of that extreme of wealth and poverty, I think, comes through in the storytelling of that, just painting the picture of what life was like for them.
Yes.
And so
that song is great. But all your songs are great, and I encourage everybody that's listening to go find you on Martin Kerr on YouTube, on Facebook. Where else can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to find if you know how to spell my name, which is Martin Kerr, MartinKerr. And martinkerrmusic.com is my website, and you can see what I'm up to there and join my newsletter if you want to keep in touch more directly. Mm-hmm. But I'm quite active on Facebook and Instagram, and starting to be more so on YouTube as well. Mm-hmm. I always enjoy hearing from people directly about their experiences. People reach out to me about how my songs have affected them, or about things that they're writing themselves. So it's always nice to hear from people one-to-one.
Mm-hmm. So I want to actually wrap up the interview with, is there a Baha'i teaching or a Baha'i quote that you think has really influenced you throughout your life, or that you come back to over and over again?
Wow, so many. I think my favorite book of the Baha'i writings is The Seven Valleys. And it's a very mystical work. And it draws on the poetry of Rumi and Attar, great Persian poets from many centuries ago. And my dad gave it to me to take with me on my round the world trip. And so I really delved into that book as I was traveling. And in that experience of being freed from all of my material attachments, all the people I knew, my possessions, the places I'd been before, all my habits and routines were gone. And all that was left was the rest of the world, the open ocean and this book.
And the mysticism of the seven valleys of spiritual
that's right.
development.
It's mm-hmm. a beautiful story of spiritual quest. Mm-hmm. And so I think seeing my life as a quest and an adventure with incredible beauty on the other side of whatever tribulations or challenges are ahead has been a very wonderful perspective to have. Mm-hmm. And I try to pass that on to my children. Yes,
that's great. I'm thinking of that quote, "The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens," really applies to your life.
It really does. And I feel, one of the strongest memories of my childhood is that on my bedroom wall, we had a big map of planet Earth. And my dad put that up there when I was 4 or 5 years old. And every night as we were getting into bed, he would do a little quiz with me on one continent. So we started off learning the continents, but eventually we would learn all the countries and all the capitals in a continent. And he quizzed me on all those. So
what a smart idea. I wish I would have thought of that.
So I grew up with this fascination of all these wonderful places that one day I could go and meet the people and get to know their culture and their languages and their songs. So to see the world from such a young age as a place of possibility, as a place that is really one home that belongs to us all, was a great privilege.
Martin, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you and to hear more of the details about your life and your music, and encourage people to look you up, and we'll see if we can attach a song to this interview as well.
That would be great. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
One day, we'll be looking back on this and we'll say, aren't you happy that we did it our way? Everyone we knew was saying no way, but we were never listening anyway. So don't be just standing in the doorway. Don't you know we gotta hit the highway? Darling, this is gonna be a good day. And I've gotta say that I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. One day, I'll be looking back on this and I'll say, I'm so happy that you said you would stay. There were times I know that I was crazy, fraying at the edges and you saved me. I'm losing count of chances that you gave me. You're laughing at me dancing really badly, and telling me the reasons why you'd gladly do it all again. Cause I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Oh, I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Well, hey, words could never adequately convey everything you're giving to me today. But holding you is better than a holiday, and leaving you, I dread it like exam day. So at the risk of sounding kinda risque, everything to now has been the foreplay. Darling, I would follow you to Norway, or anywhere you want it, 'cause I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Oh, I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Oh, I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Oh, I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. Oh, I'm not bad myself, but you're amazing. You're amazing. One day, when we're getting wrinkly and our hair's grey, a rusty old banger in the driveway, one of us will maybe wear a toupee, but I will be in love with you.